The shuttle crossed the empty space between the two ships like a small silver fish swimming toward a massive whale. Commander Cora Mitchell watched through the window as the Velthari warship grew larger and larger until it filled her entire view. The ship was called the Ascendant Claw, and it looked exactly like its name suggested. Dark metal curved and twisted into shapes that reminded her of claws and teeth, and things designed to hurt. She had read the reports about the Velthari species many times during her journey here. They were warriors. They had conquered dozens of star systems through pure physical power. Their bodies stood nearly 8 feet tall, covered in natural armor that could stop bullets. They had 4 arms, each one strong enough to bend steel bars. Their mouths were filled with sharp mandibles that could bite through bone. And now, humanity wanted to trade with them. Cora took a deep breath and looked at her 2 companions. Lieutenant Greg Palmer sat to her left, his face calm, but his hands slightly tight on his knees. He was a good officer, smart and reliable, but she knew he was nervous. Ensign Nora Hayes sat to her right, younger than both of them, her eyes fixed on a data pad as she reviewed the trade proposals one more time. "Remember the rules," Cora said quietly. "Do not show fear. Do not show anger. Speak only when necessary. The Velthari respect strength and calmness." "Understood, Commander," Greg replied. Nora nodded without looking up from her data pad. The shuttle passed through a shimmering energy field and entered the landing bay of the Ascendant Claw. Cora saw rows of Velthari soldiers standing in perfect formation, their armored bodies reflecting the harsh lights above. Each one of them could probably kill her with a single blow. She pushed that thought away and stood up as the shuttle doors opened. The air inside the Velthari ship smelled strange, like metal and something sour. Cora walked down the ramp with her back straight and her face showing nothing. Greg and Nora followed close behind her. A Velthari officer approached them. He was huge, even bigger than the soldiers, and his armor had markings that showed high rank. His 4 arms were crossed over his chest in a way that looked almost human, except there were too many of them. "I am Sub-Commander Vornak," he said, through a translation device that hung around his neck. His real voice was a series of clicks and hisses, but the device turned it into flat English. "You are the human delegation." It was not a question. "I am Commander Cora Mitchell of the United Earth Fleet," Cora replied. "We thank the Velthari Dominion for agreeing to these talks." Vornak made a sound that might have been laughter. "Follow me. The High Commander is waiting." They walked through long corridors made of the same dark metal as the outside of the ship. Cora noticed that there were no soft surfaces anywhere, no chairs with cushions, no carpets. Everything was hard and sharp. This was a ship built by creatures who did not need comfort. Other Velthari watched them as they passed. Some of them were curious. Most of them looked at the humans the way a person might look at a small insect crawling across the floor. Not afraid, not angry. Just mildly interested in something so tiny and weak. Cora had expected this. Humans were new to this part of the galaxy. They had only been traveling between stars for about 200 years, while the Velthari had been doing it for thousands, and humans did not look impressive. They were small and soft and breakable compared to most of the species out here, but looks could be deceiving. The delegation finally reached a large room with a high ceiling. At the far end sat a Velthari so old that his armor had turned from black to gray. His 4 eyes were cloudy but still sharp, and when he looked at Cora, she felt like he was seeing right through her. "I am High Commander Zorveth," he said. His voice was deeper than Vornak's, rougher, like stones grinding together. "I rule this fleet and speak for the Velthari Dominion in matters of trade and war." Cora bowed her head slightly. Not too much, because that would show weakness. Just enough to show respect. "I am honored to meet you, High Commander." I hope our talks will benefit both our peoples. Zorveth leaned forward in his seat. It was not a throne, but it might as well have been. Benefit, yes. That is what your species always speaks of. Mutual benefit, trade, cooperation. He made a clicking sound. The Velthari have a different view of the universe, Commander Mitchell. And what view is that? Cora asked. Strength. Zorveth raised one of his massive arms and made a fist. The strong take what they need. The weak give what they must. This is the natural order of all things. Cora kept her face calm even though her heart was beating faster. Humans believe that cooperation makes everyone stronger. Humans believe many things, Zorveth replied. I have studied your species with great interest. You are clever. You build wonderful machines. Your ships are fast, and your weapons are powerful. He paused. But you yourselves are weak. Greg stiffened beside her, but Cora placed a hand on his arm without looking at him. We have survived many challenges, she said evenly. Because of your tools, Zorveth said. Without them, what are you? Soft flesh, brittle bones. You cannot survive in cold or heat. You cannot breathe underwater. You cannot see in darkness. Your bodies are failures of evolution, kept alive only by the machines you hide behind. He stood up, and Cora was reminded again of just how big the Velthari were. Zorveth was old, but he still towered over her like a mountain. The Velthari respect only those who can stand on their own strength, he continued. Your technology impresses us, but you do not. Perhaps these talks will succeed. Perhaps they will fail. But know this, Commander Mitchell. We do not see you as equals. We see you as clever prey that has learned to build traps. Cora felt Greg and Nora tense behind her. She understood their anger. She felt it too, burning in her chest. But she had dealt with difficult people before. She had faced enemies who wanted to see her fail, and she had learned long ago that the best response to an insult was patience. Then we will have to change your mind, High Commander, she said simply. Zorveth stared at her for a long moment. Then he made that clicking sound again, the one that might have been laughter. Perhaps you will try, he said. The talks begin tomorrow. My officers will show you to your quarters. Rest well, humans. You will need your strength for what is to come. As they were led away, Cora allowed herself one small thought. The Velthari saw humans as weak. That was their first mistake. She intended to make sure it was their last. The negotiations did not go well. Cora had expected difficulty. She had prepared for long arguments and hard bargaining, but she had not prepared for the complete lack of respect the Velthari showed toward the human delegation. Every proposal was dismissed. Every offer was mocked. Every attempt at finding common ground was met with demands that no reasonable person could accept. The Velthari wanted everything and offered nothing in return. On the second day, Cora sat across from Zorveth and his advisors in the large meeting room. The table between them was made of solid metal and had no chairs on the Velthari side because they preferred to stand. This meant that Cora and her team had to look up at them constantly, which was exactly the point. Your proposal for shared mining rights is rejected, said one of Zorveth's advisors, a Velthari named Draknal, who had 3 long scars across his face. The Velthari do not share. You may purchase raw materials from us at the prices we set. Those prices are 5 times the galactic standard, Cora replied calmly. No trade agreement could survive such terms. Then perhaps there will be no agreement, Draknal said. Your problem, not ours. Greg leaned toward Cora and whispered, They are not negotiating. They are playing with us. She knew he was right. The Velthari had agreed to these talks not because they wanted trade with humans, but because they wanted to study them, to measure them, to see if humanity was worth conquering or simply ignoring. Zorveth had been silent for most of the morning, watching the humans with his cloudy eyes. Finally, he raised one of his hands, and the room fell quiet. "We will take a rest period," he announced. "Resume in 2 hours." Cora stood and bowed her head slightly. "We appreciate the break, High Commander." Zorveth said nothing. He simply turned and walked away, followed by his advisors. During the break, Cora took her team to the observation hall. It was a large room with a wall made entirely of transparent material. Showing the stars outside, she hoped the view would help clear her mind, help her find some way to make progress with these impossible aliens. But peace was not what waited for her in that room. A group of young Velthari warriors stood near the window, talking among themselves in their clicking language. When the humans entered, they stopped talking and turned to look. Their eyes held the same contempt that Cora had seen in everyone on this ship. One of them stepped forward. He was younger than the others, his armor still shiny and new, unmarked by the scars that older Velthari wore with pride. But his eyes burned with arrogance. "The soft ones," he said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "I wondered if I would see them before they ran back to their little ships." Cora ignored him and walked toward the window. She did not want a confrontation, not now, not when the negotiations were already falling apart. But the young warrior followed her. "I am Kethral," he announced, standing directly in her path. "Son of War Chief Votharal, victor of the Kessian campaign. I have killed enemies that would make your entire species weep with fear." "I am sure you are very proud," Cora said flatly. Kethral's mandibles clicked with amusement. He looked back at his companions, who were watching with eager eyes. He wanted an audience for what came next. "I have studied your species," he continued, circling around Cora like a predator examining prey. "I have read your history, your wars, your struggles." He made a sound of disgust. "You are fascinating in your weakness." Greg stepped forward angrily, but Cora held up her hand to stop him. "You have no natural weapons," Kethral said. "No claws, no armor, no venom. Your teeth are flat and useless. Your skin tears like wet paper. A child of my species could break your bones without effort." He spread all 4 of his arms wide. "You cannot even control your own body temperature. You shake in cold and collapse in heat. How did nature create something so poorly designed?" Nora's face had gone red with anger, but she stayed silent. Kethral leaned closer to Cora, close enough that she could smell the strange scent of his breath. "But what I find most amusing," he said slowly, "is that humans do not fight barehanded. You cannot. You are too weak." He tapped one claw against his armored chest. "You must always reach for a tool, a weapon, a machine. Something to do the work that your pathetic bodies cannot do." He turned to address the room, raising his voice so that every Velthari present could hear clearly. "This is the truth of humanity. Without their guns, without their ships, without their bombs and their robots, they are nothing. They are prey. They have always been prey, and they will always be prey." The observation hall had fallen completely silent. More Velthari had gathered, drawn by the noise. Officers, soldiers, even some of Zorveth's advisors stood near the door, watching with interest. Kethral turned back to Cora with a smile that showed his sharp mandibles. "Tell me I am wrong, human. Tell me your species can fight without hiding behind your machines. Show me one example from your entire history where humans won a battle with just their bare hands." For a long moment, Cora said nothing. She felt the eyes of everyone in the room on her. She felt the weight of all their contempt pressing down on her shoulders. She knew that anything she said would be twisted and mocked. But she also knew something that Kethral did not. She looked up at him, meeting his eyes without fear, and then, very slowly, she smiled. "You want an example?" she asked quietly. Kethral's antennae twitched with surprise. He had expected fear or anger, not this calm response. "I will give you one," Cora continued. She raised her hand, palm open. Every eye in the room watched as she slowly closed her fingers into a tight fist. "I challenge you to Rakthor." The silence that followed was absolute. Cora heard Kethral's breath catch in his throat. She heard the shocked whispers that spread through the watching Velthari like ripples in water. Rakthor, the ancient Velthari ritual of single combat. No weapons, no armor, only body against body until one fighter surrendered or died. "Commander," Greg whispered urgently, his voice barely audible, "you cannot be serious. He will kill you." Cora did not look away from Kethral. "Do you accept, warrior?" she asked clearly. "Or is your courage limited to insults and boasts?" Kethral's mandibles spread wide in anger. He had been challenged in front of his companions, in front of officers who would report this to the High Commander. He could not refuse without losing all honor. "I accept," he growled, "and when I break your fragile body, your delegation will leave this ship with nothing." From the doorway came the sound of slow clapping. Zorveth walked into the room, his old eyes gleaming with something that might have been interest. "The challenge has been made and accepted," he announced. "The Rakthor will take place at sunset. No interference from either side will be permitted." He looked at Cora with new curiosity. "Prepare yourself, Commander Mitchell. You have chosen an interesting way to die." Cora met his gaze without flinching. "We will see, High Commander," she said. "We will see." The hours before sunset passed slowly. Cora sat alone in the small room that the Velthari had given her as quarters. It was cold and hard, like everything else on this ship, but she did not notice. Her mind was somewhere else, going over everything she knew about the Velthari, about their bodies, about their weaknesses. There was a knock on the door. She knew who it was before she opened it. Greg and Nora stood in the corridor, their faces tight with worry. "Commander," Greg said as soon as he stepped inside, "I have to say this again. This is insane. Kethral is twice your size. He has 4 arms. His skin can stop knives. You cannot win this fight." Cora looked at him calmly. "Close the door, Lieutenant." Greg closed it, but he did not stop talking. "I know you are brave. I know you want to show them that humans are not weak. But there are other ways. We can walk away from the negotiations. We can come back with a bigger fleet. We do not have to prove anything to these people." "Yes, we do," Cora said quietly. Nora stepped forward. Her voice was steadier than Greg's, but her eyes showed the same fear. "Commander, I have been studying Velthari biology since we arrived. Their nervous system is different from ours. Their pain responses are slower. Even if you hurt him, he might not feel it until the fight is over." "I know," Cora said. "And their bones are 3 times denser than human bones," Nora continued. "Hitting him might break your hand before it breaks anything of his." "I know that too." Greg threw his hands up in frustration. "Then why? Why are you doing this?" Cora stood up and walked to the small window that looked out at the stars. For a moment she was silent, gathering her thoughts. "When I was 12 years old," she began slowly, "I was the smallest kid in my school. I was short and thin, and I looked like I could not hurt a fly. The bigger kids thought I was an easy target. They pushed me around. They took my things. They made my life miserable." She turned to face them. "One day, a boy twice my size knocked me down in front of everyone. He laughed at me. He called me weak. He said I would never be able to fight back because I was too small and too soft." "What did you do?" Nora asked softly. "I got up," Cora said, "and I broke his nose." Greg blinked. "What?" He did not expect it. None of them did. They thought because I was small I could not fight. But my father had been teaching me boxing since I was 8. My mother had shown me judo throws since I was 6. I was not big, but I knew how to use what I had. She walked back to the center of the room. That boy never bothered me again, and neither did anyone else, because they learned something that day. Size is not the same as strength, and appearance is not the same as ability. Greg shook his head. Commander, that was a schoolyard fight. This is life or death against an alien warrior. The principle is the same, Cora said firmly. The Velthari look at us and see small, soft creatures who cannot possibly fight without weapons. They believe this because they have never seen a human fight with bare hands. They do not know what we are capable of. She picked up her datapad and showed them a diagram of Velthari anatomy. I have been studying this since before we left Earth. The Velthari have natural armor, yes, but it does not cover everything. Here, under the arms, the skin is softer. Here, at the base of the skull, the nerve cluster is exposed. Here, behind the knee joints, the armor plates do not fully connect. Nora's eyes widened as she looked at the diagram. You found their weak points. Every creature has weak points, Cora said. The Velthari are used to fighting other armored species. They swing hard and try to break through defenses, but humans learn to fight differently. We learn to find openings, to strike where it hurts most, to use an enemy's strength against them. Greg was quiet for a moment, processing everything she had said. Finally, he spoke again. You really think you can win? I think I can survive, Cora corrected. And I think I can make Kethrol hurt enough to surrender. That is all I need. There was another knock on the door. When Cora opened it, Sub-Commander Vornak stood outside with 2 guards. It is time, he said. The arena is ready. Cora nodded and stepped into the corridor. Greg and Nora followed close behind her. They walked through the ship in silence. Other Velthari stopped to watch them pass. The word had spread quickly. A human had challenged a Velthari warrior to Rakthor. It was the most interesting thing that had happened on this ship in years. The arena was located in the lower section of the Ascendant Claw. It was a circular pit carved from the metal floor, about 30 feet across and 10 feet deep. Stone steps surrounded it on all sides, filled with hundreds of Velthari spectators who had come to watch the fight. Cora looked down at the arena floor. It was made of rough metal with no soft surfaces. If she fell, it would hurt. If she was thrown, it would hurt more. Kethrol was already waiting at the bottom, stripped of his formal uniform and wearing only a simple combat wrap around his waist. His 4 arms hung at his sides, each one thick with muscle. His armor gleamed under the harsh lights. He looked up at Cora and smiled with his mandibles. I am glad you came, human. I thought perhaps you would hide in your room and claim illness. Cora removed her jacket and handed it to Greg. Underneath, she wore only a simple undershirt and her uniform pants. She kicked off her boots and stood barefoot. Commander, Greg said one last time. Please. She looked at him and smiled gently. Trust me, Lieutenant. I know what I am doing. Then she walked down the stone steps and into the arena. The crowd fell silent. Every eye was fixed on the small human woman standing across from the massive Velthari warrior. The difference in size was almost comical. Kethrol was nearly 3 feet taller than her and probably 4 times her weight. High Commander Zorveth stood at the edge of the pit, looking down at both fighters. The rules of Rakthor are simple, he announced. No weapons, no outside help. The fight continues until one fighter yields or cannot continue. He paused. Or dies. Kethrol cracked his neck and rolled his massive shoulders. Any last words, human? He called across the arena. Cora shifted her weight onto the balls of her feet. She raised her hands in front of her face, fists loose, elbows tucked. It was a stance that had been developed and perfected over thousands of years of human combat. Yes, she said calmly. You should have done more research. Zorveth raised his hand. "Begin!" Kethral charged. There was no hesitation, no careful approach. He simply lowered his head and ran at Cora with all four arms spread wide, ready to grab her and crush her in a deadly embrace. The arena floor shook under his heavy footsteps. The Velthari in the crowd roared with approval. This was how their warriors fought. Overwhelming force, crushing power, end the fight before it can truly begin. But when Kethral reached the spot where Cora had been standing, she was no longer there. She had moved to the side at the last possible moment, dropping low and spinning away from his grasp. Her body flowed like water, smooth and quick, too fast for his massive arms to catch. As she passed him, her fist shot out and struck the soft tissue under his upper right arm, exactly where she had studied in the anatomy diagram. It was not a hard punch by Velthari standards, but it hit a nerve cluster perfectly. Kethral's right arms went numb. He stumbled, confused, and turned to face her. His right arms hung limp at his sides, not responding to his commands. Pain signals were just starting to reach his brain. "What did you do?" he demanded. Cora did not answer. She was already moving again, circling around him, staying light on her feet. She looked calm, focused, ready. The Velthari crowd had gone quiet. This was not what they expected. The human should have been caught. She should have been crushed. Instead, she was still standing, and their warrior was hurt. Kethral shook his right arms, trying to get feeling back into them. Slowly, painfully, they began to respond again. He flexed his fingers and made fists. "Lucky strike," he growled. "It will not happen again." He came at her more carefully this time, using his two left arms to grab while keeping his right arms back for defense. His movements were still fast and powerful, but now there was caution in them. Cora waited until he was close, then ducked under his reaching arms. She came up inside his guard, too close for him to get a good grip, and drove her elbow into the gap between his chest armor plates. The point of her elbow found flesh. Kethral grunted in pain and swung his arm to knock her away. But she had already moved, rolling across the metal floor and coming up several feet away. Blood dripped from a cut on his chest. Green blood. It was not a deep wound, but it was visible, and every Velthari in the arena could see it. A human had drawn first blood. "She is fast," someone in the crowd murmured. "Too fast," another voice agreed. Kethral wiped the blood from his chest and looked at it on his fingers. His eyes burned with new anger. The playful arrogance was gone. Now he saw Cora as a real threat. "You will pay for that," he said through clenched mandibles. He attacked again, faster this time, more aggressive. His forearms came at her from different angles, trying to trap her, corner her, give her nowhere to run. He was using his size and reach, forcing her back toward the arena wall. Cora retreated, dodging and weaving, but she was running out of space. The metal wall was only a few feet behind her. Once her back hit that wall, Kethral would have her. That was what he thought anyway. When Cora felt the wall behind her, she did not panic. Instead, she planted her foot against it and pushed off, launching herself directly at Kethral. He had expected her to freeze, to cower. He was not ready for her to attack. She jumped high, higher than he thought a human could jump, and wrapped her arm around his neck from the side. Using her momentum, she swung her body around and hooked her legs around his upper left arm. It was a chokehold, a technique that humans had developed thousands of years ago for situations exactly like this one. Her arm pressed against the blood vessels in his neck, cutting off the flow to his brain. Kethral roared and tried to shake her off. He spun around, slammed his back against the wall, grabbed at her with his free arms, but Cora held on, squeezing tighter, her muscles burning with the effort. His movements became slower, weaker. The lack of blood to his brain was making him dizzy. But Velthari were tougher than any human had a right to expect. With a final burst of strength, Kethrol reached up with his lower right arm and grabbed Cora's leg. His grip was like iron. He pulled hard and tore her away from his neck. Cora flew through the air and hit the arena floor hard. Pain exploded through her shoulder and side. She rolled with the impact, the way she had been trained, but it still hurt. A lot. She forced herself to her feet. Her left arm was not working properly. The shoulder might be dislocated. She pushed the pain aside and raised her guard again. Kethrol was breathing hard. His eyes were unfocused from the chokehold. But he was still standing. "You are strong," he admitted, his voice rough. "Stronger than I thought possible." "I told you," Cora said, pain making her voice tight. "You should have done more research." They circled each other slowly now. Both of them were hurt. Both of them were tired. But neither one was willing to quit. Kethrol attacked first. He swung his lower left arm in a wide arc, trying to catch her with a hook that would have knocked a normal human unconscious. Cora ducked under it and countered with a knee strike to his thigh, hitting the gap behind his knee joint where the armor did not protect. His leg buckled. He dropped to one knee. Cora did not hesitate. She drove her good elbow into the base of his skull where the nerve cluster was exposed. It was the most painful spot on a Velthari body. Kethrol screamed. It was not a sound of anger. It was a sound of pure agony. He collapsed forward onto his hands and knees, all four arms shaking. His vision was blurred. His body refused to obey his commands. Cora stepped back, breathing hard, cradling her injured arm. "Yield," she said. The arena was completely silent. No one moved. No one spoke. They had just watched something impossible. A small, soft, unarmed human had brought down a Velthari warrior using nothing but her bare hands. Kethrol raised his head slowly. His eyes found Cora's face. She saw many things in those eyes. Pain, shock, disbelief. But most of all, she saw something she had never expected to see. Respect. "I yield," he said. The words echoed through the silent arena. Cora let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. Her legs felt weak. Her shoulder was screaming with pain. Every muscle in her body wanted to collapse. But she stayed standing, because the Velthari were still watching, and she would not show weakness. Not now, not after coming this far. High Commander Zorveth slowly descended the stone steps into the arena. His old eyes were fixed on Cora with an expression she could not read. "Impossible," someone in the crowd whispered. But it had happened. They had all seen it. A human had won. High Commander Zorveth stood before Cora in the center of the arena. His massive body blocked out the light from above, casting a shadow over her that should have felt threatening. But somehow, it did not. The old Velthari's eyes studied her face, her stance, her injured arm that she held close to her body. He looked at her the way a scholar might look at a puzzle that had just revealed an unexpected solution. "How?" he asked simply. Cora met his gaze. Her body hurt everywhere, and she wanted nothing more than to sit down and rest. But she knew this moment was important. This was the moment everything could change. "How did I win?" she asked. Or how did I know I could? Both. Cora took a breath and looked around the arena at the hundreds of Velthari watching in stunned silence. Many of them had come expecting to see a human die. Now they waited to hear her explain the impossible. "You made an error," she said, her voice clear and strong despite her exhaustion. "All of you made the same error when you judged humanity." Zorveth's antennae twitched. "What error?" "You assumed that because we build tools, we depend on them. You thought that our technology was a replacement for physical strength, that without our machines we would be helpless." She shook her head slowly. "But that is not how it works, not for humans." She gestured to herself with her good arm, showing her small body, her soft skin, her lack of natural weapons. "Look at me. You are right that I have no claws, no armor, no venom. My body is exactly as weak as you said it was." She paused. "So how did I beat him?" Kethrall had pulled himself into a sitting position at the edge of the arena. His eyes were fixed on Cora, listening to every word. "For 100,000 years," Cora continued, "humans survived on a planet filled with predators that were bigger, faster, and deadlier than us. Lions, bears, wolves, creatures with teeth and claws and strength that made us look like toys." She held up her fist. "We could not outrun them. We could not overpower them. We could not grow armor to protect ourselves. So we learned to think. We learned to plan. We learned to work together." She unclenched her fist and spread her fingers. "And we learned to fight with these." Zorveth looked at her hand. 5 small fingers. No claws. Nothing that should be dangerous. "Our hands cannot crush bone like yours can," Cora said. "But we learned where to strike so that we would not need to. Our bodies are not armored, so we learned to move in ways that make us hard to hit. We are not strong, so we learned to use our enemy's strength against them." She turned to face the crowd directly. "You think humans only learned to fight after we invented weapons, but that is backwards. We invented weapons because we were already fighters. Every technique I use today was developed thousands of years before we had guns or bombs or spaceships." She pointed at Kethrall. "When I choked him, I was using a method that my ancestors created before they even had metal tools. When I struck his nerve points, I was using knowledge that was passed down through hundreds of generations. When I dodged his attacks, I was moving in ways that were practiced by my people when your species had not yet left your home planet." The arena was completely silent now. Even the Velthari who had been whispering among themselves had stopped to listen. "You call us soft," Cora said, "but soft things can be flexible. They can bend without breaking. They can find gaps that hard things cannot reach." She looked back at Zorveth. "You call us weak. But weakness forced us to become clever, to find solutions that strength alone could never provide." She took a step closer to the High Commander, looking up at his towering form without fear. "You said the Velthari respect only those who can stand on their own strength. Well, here I am. I am standing. And I used nothing but my bare hands and the knowledge my ancestors gave me." She raised her injured arm and made a fist despite the pain. "This is what humans are, High Commander. We are not prey that learned to build traps. We are predators who chose to make tools because it was more efficient than killing with our hands." Her voice hardened. "But we have never forgotten how to do it the old way, and we teach every generation to remember." Zorveth was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he performed a gesture that Cora had never seen before. He lowered all 4 of his arms to his sides. He bent his head forward, and he closed his eyes. Around the arena, Velthari gasped. "What is he doing?" Greg whispered from the edge of the pit. Vornok, standing nearby, answered in a voice filled with disbelief. "The bow of equals. He is acknowledging her as a true warrior." When Zorveth raised his head, his eyes held something new. Not contempt, not amusement. Respect. "I have lived for many years," he said quietly. "I have fought in many wars. I have seen species rise and fall across this galaxy. And in all that time, I have never been so wrong about anyone as I was about your kind." He turned to address the crowd. "Let it be known throughout the Velthari Dominion. Humans are not to be dismissed. They are not to be underestimated. They have proven themselves in the ancient way, through blood and pain and victory." His voice rose. "They are warriors." The crowd erupted in noise, not anger, not protest. Something like excitement, something like approval. Zorveth looked back at Cora. "The trade negotiations will resume tomorrow, and this time they will be conducted as equals." He paused. "Is this acceptable to you, Commander Mitchell?" Cora allowed herself a small smile. "It is, High Commander." Hours later, Cora sat in the medical bay of the human shuttle. A doctor had set her dislocated shoulder and wrapped her ribs. Greg and Nora sat beside her, still looking at her with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "I still cannot believe that happened," Nora said softly. "Neither can I," Greg admitted. "Commander, you just changed the entire relationship between our species. You know that, right?" Cora leaned back against the medical bed and closed her eyes. "I did not do anything special," she said. "I just reminded them of something they forgot." She smiled faintly. "Humans have been fighting for survival since the beginning. We fought animals that should have eaten us. We fought weather that should have frozen us. We fought diseases that should have killed us. And somehow, against all odds, we won." She opened her eyes and looked at her bandaged hands. "Tools make us powerful. Technology makes us reach the stars. But underneath all of that, we are still the same creatures who learned to punch our way out of extinction." She flexed her fingers slowly. "The Velthari thought our machines were our strength. They were wrong. Our machines are just what we build when we are not fighting with our fists." Outside the shuttle window, the stars gleamed in the endless darkness of space. Humanity had been underestimated before, by predators, by nature, by other species who looked at their soft bodies and saw weakness. It never ended well for those who made that mistake. And now, the Velthari understood that too.